Deep within an obsidian heart lies a secret that has been protected for a lifetime. We break through the hard exterior to find the pulse of humanity that still beats within the darkness. Hit subscribe now and discover the secrets hidden in the shadows. Sign it, or I will make sure you never work in this city again. My husband said those words quietly, almost gently, while sliding a document across the table. We were sitting in the conference room of his family's real estate firm, surrounded by his mother, his uncle, and two attorneys I had never met before. It was supposed to be a routine property review. Instead, it was an ambush. The document in front of me was a quitclaim deed. If I signed it, I would be transferring my legal ownership of our marital home, our rental property in Phoenix, and a commercial lot in Scottsdale entirely into his mother's name. My husband smiled at me the way he always did when he wanted something. Calm. Patient. Certain I would fold. I didn't fold. I picked up the pen, looked him in the eye, and set it back down. Then I said, I need to use the restroom, and I walked out. Before I tell you what I had already set in motion 3 weeks before that meeting, I want to ask you something. Have you ever stayed silent not because you were weak, but because you were waiting? Drop your answer in the comments. I read every single one. My name is Claire. I am 32 years old. For the past 6 years, I have been a senior tax compliance officer at a mid-size accounting firm in Phoenix, Arizona. My job is to find the things people try to hide inside numbers. Depreciation schedules that don't add up, transfers that happen just before a filing deadline, entities that exist on paper but have no real business purpose. I am very good at finding those things. My husband's name is Derek. We met when I was 25 and he was 30. He was charming and confident and came from a family with real estate money. Not generational wealth exactly, but the kind of family that had enough to always feel entitled to more. His mother, Margaret, had built the business herself after his father left. She was sharp and controlling, and she had never once looked at me like I belonged in her family. She looked at me like I was a temporary arrangement Derek had made without consulting her. For the first 2 years of our marriage, I told myself I was imagining it. Margaret was just protective. She was just particular. Derek loved me. That was what mattered. Then I found the first document. It was a Tuesday in March, about 18 months ago. Derek had asked me to find an insurance policy in his home office because he was traveling for work and needed the policy number. I found the insurance folder, but it was stuffed behind a different folder, a manila one with no label. I almost put it back without opening it. I wish I had a cleaner story to tell, some dramatic moment where I knew immediately what I was looking at. But the truth is I opened it because it was crammed in sideways and I was trying to neaten the drawer. Inside were 3 documents. The first was a promissory note. Derek had borrowed $240,000 from his mother 14 months earlier. The collateral listed was our home that I was also on the title for. My signature was on the promissory note as a co-borrower. I had never signed that document. I had never seen it before in my life. I stood in his office for a long time. The house was quiet. The refrigerator hummed from the kitchen. I looked at my signature on that paper, the way you look at your face, in a photo where you don't recognize yourself. The loops of the letters were close to mine, but not quite right. Someone had practiced. I put the folder back exactly the way I found it. I texted Derek the insurance policy number. Then I sat on the edge of the bed and I made a decision. I was not going to confront him. Not yet, because I knew Derek. I had watched him operate for 6 years. If I confronted him too early, he would minimize, then apologize, then find a way to make the whole thing about my trust issues. He would involve Margaret, who would back him completely. I would be emotional, he would be reasonable, and whatever he was planning would go further underground where I could not see it. I needed to know the full shape of it before I said a single word. I have a colleague named Priya. She has been doing forensic accounting for 11 years, and she once told me the most dangerous financial crimes are never the dramatic ones. They are the quiet ones. The transfers that happen in small amounts over a long time. The documents signed by people who didn't know what they were signing. The entities set up in a spouse's name without their knowledge so that when the marriage ends, the assets are already somewhere else. I called Priya that night from my car in a parking garage. I told her what I found. She was quiet for a moment. Then she asked, "Do you have access to your joint financial accounts?" "Yes," I said. "Do you have access to his business accounts?" "No." "Do you know the name of his LLC?" "Derek Holdings." She said, "Give me 48 hours." What Priya found in 48 hours made the promissory note look like a parking ticket. Derek Holdings had been used as a pass-through for 4 property transactions in the past 2 years. 3 of those properties had been purchased using funds from our joint savings account, always in amounts just under the threshold that would trigger automatic bank reporting. The deeds on all three properties listed Derek Holdings as the sole owner, not our names. Not our marriage, his LLC, which I had no ownership interest in. There was more. Priya had flagged 2 separate tax filings where Derek had claimed business losses on properties that were actually generating rental income. The rental income was being deposited into an account I did not know existed, held in the name of another LLC, this one registered in Nevada, with his mother listed as the managing member. They had been building a structure around me for years. Derek was the front, Margaret was the architect, and my name, my forged signature, was the foundation they had poured everything on top of. If I ever discovered the truth and tried to claim my marital share of those assets, I would be told there were no assets, there was only debt. And some of that debt, thanks to the forged signature, appeared to be mine. I sat with that information for 2 weeks. I went to work, I came home, I cooked dinner. I watched Derek sit across from me at our kitchen table and talk about weekend plans and a show he wanted to watch, and whether we should repaint the guest bedroom. I smiled. I nodded. I said, sure, whatever you want. Inside, I was conducting the most important audit of my life. I made copies of everything Priya had found. I created an encrypted external drive and stored it at my office in a locked drawer. I took photos of the original promissory note on my phone and emailed them to Priya, to my personal cloud storage, and to a Gmail account I had created from a device Derek did not know I owned. I ordered my own credit report and found 2 additional credit inquiries I had not authorized, both tied to applications for commercial lines of credit. Then I called an attorney, not a divorce attorney, a financial crimes attorney named Patricia, who had spent 14 years in the U.S. Attorney's Office before going into private practice. Priya had referred her to me. When I sat down in Patricia's office and laid out everything I had, she looked at the documents for a long time without speaking. Then she looked up and said, "This is wire fraud. This is mortgage fraud. And depending on what we find in those Nevada filings, it may also be tax evasion." I asked her what I should do. She said, "Nothing yet. We need one more piece. We need to catch him doing it in real time." That was when Derek asked me to come to the family firm for a property review. 3 weeks before that meeting, Patricia had made a quiet referral to the IRS Criminal Investigation Division. Not a formal complaint yet. A referral. A conversation. She had handed them Priya's forensic summary, the forged documents, and the structure of the Nevada LLC. They had been interested. Very interested. Because Derek and Margaret were not the only people the CI division was looking at. They were already building a case on a larger network of real estate fraud in the Phoenix metro area, and Derek's transactions matched the pattern almost exactly. What Derek did not know was that the 2 attorneys he had hired to sit in that conference room were not just his attorneys. One of them was a cooperating witness who had already been approached by federal investigators and had agreed to participate in a controlled meeting. So when Derek slid that quitclaim deed across the table and told me to sign it, there was a recording device in the room. And when I said I needed to use the restroom and walked out, I was not panicking. I was following the exact protocol Patricia had outlined. Remove yourself from the room. Let them believe the meeting failed. Wait. I drove home. I made tea. I sat on the back porch and watched the sun go down over the desert. My phone was on the table beside me. I did not turn on the television. I did not call anyone. I just sat. At 8:47 that evening, Patricia called. She said 4 words. They made the move. Derek and Margaret had left the meeting and driven directly to a title company they worked with regularly. They had attempted to file the quitclaim deed using what they believed was my signature. The signature on the deed was not mine. It was another forgery, prepared in advance, the same handwriting as the one on the promissory note. They had planned all along to file it with or without my cooperation. The meeting had been theater, a last attempt to get the real signature so they could claim I had signed voluntarily. The title company employee who processed the filing had been briefed by federal investigators the previous day. The moment that deed was submitted, it became evidence. Derek was arrested at 7:15 the following morning, in the driveway of our home, still in the clothes he had worn to bed. I watched from the kitchen window as 2 agents in windbreakers walked toward him, and he turned around and his face went through about 4 different expressions in 2 seconds. Disbelief first, then calculation. Then the particular look of a man who has just understood that the thing he thought was his most valuable asset, my compliance, had never been his at all. Margaret was arrested at her office at 9 in the morning. Patricia told me later she had asked for Derek 3 times before she understood that Derek was not coming to help her, because Derek was in the same position she was. I did not go to either arrest. I had already left the house before Derek woke up. I had been packing for 2 weeks, 1 bag at a time. Things I moved to my office, to Priya's spare room, to a storage unit I had rented under my name only. By the time the agents arrived, the only things left in that house that belonged to me were the furniture I didn't want. The charges against Derek included wire fraud, mortgage fraud, forgery of a financial instrument, and conspiracy. Margaret was charged as a co-conspirator. The Nevada LLC investigation pulled in 2 additional parties from the broader network the CI division had already been building. Patricia told me our case had essentially handed federal investigators the connector piece they had been missing for 8 months. The forged promissory note alone, the one I had found crammed in that manila folder on a Tuesday in March, was described in the federal filing as the foundational document of a scheme to fraudulently encumber marital assets and transfer beneficial ownership outside the marital estate in anticipation of divorce proceedings. In plain language, Derek had been planning to divorce me. He had been planning it for at least 2 years. The entire structure, the LLCs, the forged signatures, the transfers, had been designed so that when he finally served me with papers, I would receive nothing. I would actually inherit debt. And because my name was on some of those instruments, I might spend years in litigation trying to prove I hadn't known. Margaret had been the one to design it, Derek had been the one to execute it, and they had both assumed I would never look closely enough to see it. That assumption was their only real mistake. I want to tell you about the phone call from my mother-in-law, because it matters. Margaret called me from a number I didn't recognize, 4 days after her arrest, while she was out on bail. I almost didn't answer. I picked up because I thought it might be Patricia. Margaret's voice was not what I expected. I had prepared myself for anger, for the clipped, controlled tone she always used with me, the one that communicated she was tolerating my presence as a courtesy to her son. Instead, she sounded tired. She sounded like a different person. She said my name. Then she said, "I want you to understand that none of this was about you personally." I sat with that for a moment. Then I said, "I know. That is exactly the problem." She started to say something about how Derek had been struggling, about the pressure of the business, about how she had only been trying to protect what she had built. I listened to all of it. I did not interrupt. When she finished, I said, "You forged my name on a debt instrument. You built a structure designed to leave me with nothing. And when I didn't sign voluntarily, you forged it again and tried to file it anyway. I understand you weren't thinking of me personally. I was just a line item in your plan. But I need you to know that is not a defense. That is the charge." I hung up. I did not block her number. I forwarded the recording of the call to Patricia. People sometimes ask me, usually after stories like this, whether I feel guilty, whether some part of me wishes I had handled it differently, talked to Derek directly, given him a chance to explain, tried to save the marriage. Here is what I know. I gave Derek 6 years. I gave him my income, my credit, my trust, and apparently my signature. I asked him once, about a year into our marriage, why he sometimes seemed distant when we talked about finances. He said I was being paranoid. He said I had a tendency to look for problems that weren't there. He said it was probably just my job making me see fraud everywhere. I believed him. I adjusted. I stopped asking questions. That is the thing no one tells you about being in a relationship with someone who is deceiving you. It is not a dramatic moment. It is not one conversation where you know something is wrong. It is a slow accumulation of moments where you override your own instincts because you trust another person more than you trust yourself. The day I found that folder in his desk was the day I decided to stop overriding. The house was eventually seized as part of the asset forfeiture connected to the fraud charges. The rental property and the commercial lot were frozen pending the federal case. I did not fight for any of it. Patricia told me I had strong grounds to claim a portion of the marital assets as a wronged party. I told her I wanted none of it. Not 1 square foot of a foundation that had been built on forgeries. I got my name cleared on the fraudulent promissory note. The credit inquiries were removed from my report. My name was struck from the instruments I had never actually signed. What I walked away with was exactly what I had come into the marriage with. My job, my savings, my name. Some people will read that and say, I lost. I want to tell you why I know I didn't. I sat in Patricia's office the day the federal indictment was filed, and she walked me through every count. When she finished, she said, I have worked financial crimes cases for 16 years. Most of the victims I work with never find out until it is too late. You found a crumpled folder in a desk drawer, and you did not say a word for 3 weeks while you built an airtight case. She shook her head slightly. I don't think you understand how unusual that is. I thought about the parking garage, Priya's voice on the phone saying, give me 48 hours, the encrypted drive in my office drawer, the tea I drank on the back porch the night they made the move. Every moment I had chosen stillness over panic, patience over confrontation, precision over emotion. My job is to find what people try to hide inside numbers. I have been doing it for 9 years. Derek spent 2 of those years building a structure he was certain I would never find. He knew what I did for a living, and he still believed I would not look. That was not a mistake in execution. That was a failure of imagination. He could not imagine that the person he had been planning to discard had been quietly conducting the final audit for months. I walked out of Patricia's office into a Phoenix afternoon. The heat hit me the way it always does in June, immediate and total. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment, and I thought about the conference room, the quitclaim deed, my husband's patient smile as he slid it toward me, the pen I picked up and set back down. I thought about all the times I had made myself smaller, all the dinners where I had changed the subject, all the questions I had swallowed, the version of me that had stood in his office holding a forged document and chosen, very deliberately, not to react. She had been waiting for the right moment. I think she had been waiting for a long time. I put on my sunglasses, walked to my car, and drove back to the apartment I had signed a lease on 3 weeks earlier. My name only, no cosigner, no joint account, nothing that belonged to anyone but me. If you have ever had to trust yourself more than you trusted the person who was supposed to love you, drop the word steady in the comments. And if someone in your life is asking you to sign something you don't understand, please do not pick up that pen. Share this with someone who needs to hear it.